Thank you for joining us around the fire. For more information or to make a donation, please visit randomactsnetwork.com. Now, want to hear a scary story?
One of the first jobs I had was as an after-hours janitor at Come and Go. Most of the time, my shifts lasted from around 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the manager arrived in the morning. Usually, I'd be scheduled to work with one or two other people, but it varied, and if anyone ended up calling in sick, I could easily find myself working alone. For the most part, I liked the quiet. I could get a few hours of studying or watching movies in when no one else was around. My friends asked me all the time how I didn't get creeped out working there so late by myself, and honestly, I'm not sure. The one area of the gas station that I did find creepy, though, was the warehouse, which was really just the unfinished basement below the store. It was a bit larger than the layout of the station. Sometimes I'd have to run down there for something, usually the soap we used to clean the floors. But that was pretty rare, as we kept a small stock upstairs to pull from. One night, I was there, alone, and I had used all the floor cleaner and had to go down to the warehouse. The place was barely lit up even with all the lights on. It was around 2 a.m, so I had quite a bit more of the shift to go. Just as I stopped and reached for the soap, I heard the sound of footsteps somewhere else in the basement. I knew I was the only one there and nearly pissed myself. Instead, I grabbed the soap and then took a quick look around all of the warehouse shelves. But there was no one there. As I reached the top of the stairs, I practically jumped out of my skin. There was a man waiting there, probably mid-20s, just staring down into the basement. I said something along the lines of, "Jesus, can I help you?" And he said his name was Josh. It was his first night on the schedule, filling in for one of my coworkers who skipped her shift. Apparently, the manager had just told him to come find me and follow me around as I did the job, which was on brand for the boss. After shaking off the shock and surprise from the man's sudden appearance, I gave him a quick tour, showing him where we kept the soap downstairs and where the break room was. He mentioned the manager by name, and he had some of the basics under his belt already from talking with him earlier. But the longer we worked together, the weirder this man made me feel. He just kept staring at me, like barely blinking, watching my every move. And every once in a while, he'd make some creepy comment under his breath. Nothing too crazy, just off enough for me to notice. We didn't really have much to do, so he skipped taking a break and left his shift early, around 5 a.m. That was my idea. I was happy to have the last hour to myself, especially with how weird the dude had been. My manager showed up shortly after 6 a.m., and after saying hello, I asked him why he didn't tell me in advance about Josh. The manager was confused. "Josh," I repeated, "the new guy." His response made the hairs on my neck stand straight up. "What new guy?" he asked. "We don't have any new guys." I tried to laugh, but couldn't. "He started last night," I said. "He shadowed me the whole shift." My manager shook his head and grimaced. "You were the only person scheduled last night," he said. "There shouldn't have been anyone else here with you." We called the police and pulled the shitty camera footage, but as far as I know, it never went anywhere. My manager reluctantly gave me a week off to get over it, but I never ended up going back. I'll never know what the guy's intentions were, where he came from, or why he was watching me so closely. Maybe I don't want to know. I don't usually find myself in situations like this, but that night was different. I was driving through the middle of a national forest, and it was almost 2 a.m. I'm not sure what possessed me to take such a desolate route so late, but there I was, miles from civilization with my gas gauge dangerously close to empty. There had been a sign a few miles back that said no gas for 45 miles. It had been the kind of ominous warning you see in horror movies right before something bad happens, but my options were obviously limited. I could either push through on fumes and hope for the best, or stop at the gas station it was advertising. Normally, I'd never consider stopping so late, especially in the middle of nowhere, but the thought of being stranded out there was even worse. My nerves were already on edge as I rounded the bend, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and apprehension when I saw the small gas station come into view. I was surprised it was even open at that hour. The station had one of those flickering neon signs that barely illuminated the words, 24-hour self-serve. The place was practically swallowed by the surrounding forest, with trees pressing in on all sides, their shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. It sort of felt like stepping into another time. What really caught my attention, though, was the old man in dirty coveralls working on one of the pumps. He looked out of place, even for a run-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. His clothes were covered in oil and grime, and he was hunched over, focused on something near the base of the pump. I couldn't tell what he was doing, but he didn't seem to notice my car pulling up. I parked near one of the pumps and got out, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the breeze and the hum of the station's lights. I tried to pay at the pump, but my card wouldn't go through. The machine just beeped at me, refusing to authorize the transaction. I figured it was probably old equipment, and that I'd have to try another pump. As I moved to the next one, I glanced over at the old man. He hadn't looked up once, just kept working on whatever he was doing. Something about the way he ignored me felt off. I'm not the kind of person who likes to bother other people, but I needed gas, and he seemed like the only person around who could help. I called out to him, asking if he knew what was wrong with the pump. He didn't respond. It was like I wasn't even there. He just kept his head down, twisting away at something with a wrench with his back to me. "Excuse me," I called again, louder this time. But still nothing. He just kept working, the metallic clink of his tools echoing in the stillness. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was hard of hearing, or maybe he was just one of those grumpy old guys who didn't like to be bothered. Either way, I needed gas. The second pump wouldn't take my card either, so feeling frustrated, I decided to go inside the small store attached to the station. The lights inside were on, and through the smudged windows I could see a cluttered counter with a few scattered items. A couple of candy bars, some cigarettes, and a register that looked older than I was. It felt strange going in there, like I was intruding into a place that I didn't belong. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, but there was no one at the counter. The place smelled like stale coffee and dust, and everything was coated with a thin layer of neglect. I noticed a small TV in the corner, its screen filled with static, and an ancient-looking radio playing some crackly old tune. The whole scene was surreal. Then I saw him, the old man behind the counter, slumped over and sound asleep. His head was resting on his arm, and he was snoring softly, completely oblivious to my presence. I felt bad about waking him, but I was getting desperate to get back on the road. I cleared my throat and knocked gently on the counter. He jolted awake with a start, letting out a small yelp of terror. His eyes were wide with confusion, and for a moment, he just stared at me like I was some kind of ghost. Then, Remembering where he was, he chuckled nervously, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry about that," he muttered, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Must have dozed off. It's been a quiet night." I couldn't help but laugh a little too. It felt good to break the tension. "No worries," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I just need some gas. The pumps outside won't take my card." He nodded, still shaking off remnants of sleep. "Yeah, those pumps are old. Sometimes they act up. Cash works better if you've got it." I took out a $20 bill from my purse and handed it to him. "Can you please put this on pump 2? He took the money and punched a few buttons into the register. As he did, I mentioned to the man outside, the one working on the pump. "I tried asking the guy outside for help, but he didn't seem to hear me," I said. "Is he fixing something?" The man behind the counter stopped what he was doing, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What guy?" "The old man in coveralls," I said, feeling a bit uneasy. "He was working on one of the pumps when I pulled up." The attendant looked at me like I'd said something crazy. "There's no one out there," he said slowly. "We don't have any maintenance scheduled, and the company sure as hell wouldn't send someone out at this time." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "But I saw him," I insisted. "He was right there. He wouldn't say anything, but he was definitely working on the pump." The attendant shook his head. "You must have been seeing things. It's late, and this place can play tricks on you if you're not careful." I didn't know what to say. The whole situation felt off, but I didn't want to push it. I just wanted to fill up my tank and get the hell out of there. "Yeah, maybe," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was pounding. "Thanks for the gas." I headed back outside, the bell jingling behind me as I left. The night air was colder than before. I walked back to my car, shivering and glancing around the lot. The old man was nowhere to be found, just like the attendant had said. But there was something else. Where the man had been working, there was a mess of gas spilled along the pavement, the pungent smell of fuel filling the air. It looked like someone had yanked the nozzle out of the pump in a hurry, letting it gush onto the ground. A trail of fresh oil led from the puddle of gas straight into the dark woods beyond the station, a thick, black line that seemed to disappear into the trees. My heart raced as I stood there, staring at that trail. But there was one more thing, something that made my blood run cold. Just near the edge of the woods, lying in the grass, was an old, rusty wrench. The same kind of wrench the man had been using when I saw him. It was covered in a dark, sticky substance, but I could tell from where I stood that it wasn't oil. It was blood. I backed away slowly, my instincts screaming at me to get out of there. My hands shook as I grabbed the nozzle and started filling up my tank, my eyes darting back and forth between the woods and the station. I felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down. Every second felt like an eternity. But finally, the pump clicked off, and I hastily shoved the nozzle back into place. I jumped into my car, locking the doors as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the keys into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life and I floored the gas pedal, not caring about speed limits or the curves of the road. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following me. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the darkness pressing in from all sides. Eventually, the forest thinned out, and I reached the edge of the woods. The tension in my chest began to ease, but the fear lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a well-lit parking lot and finally allowed myself to breathe. I sat there for a long time, replaying everything that had happened. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't imagining it. That gas station, that man, whatever it all had been, it was real. I never took that route again. no matter how much time it might save. And to this day, I can't pass a gas station late at night without feeling a shiver of unease, wondering if I might see that old man in the coveralls again, working on a pump that's long since stopped working, in a place where no one should be.